The United States, after having spent over $2.5 trillion since my election to completely rebuild our great military, is also by far the world's most powerful nation. Hopefully, it will never have to use this power. If you want freedom, take pride in your country. If you want democracy, hold on to your sovereignty. And if you want peace, love your nation. The future does not belong to globalists. The future belongs to patriots. The American people are absolutely committed to restoring balance to our relationship with China. Hopefully, we can reach an agreement that will be beneficial for both countries. One of the greatest security threats facing peace-loving nations today is the repressive regime in Iran. No responsible government should subsidize Iran's bloodlust. Today, I have a message for those open border activists who cloak themselves in the rhetoric of social justice. Your policies are not just. Your policies are cruel and evil. Today, I repeat a message for the world that I have delivered at home. America will never be a socialist country. We want every nation in our region to flourish and its people to thrive in freedom and peace. In that mission, we are also committed to supporting those people in the Western Hemisphere who live under brutal oppression, such as those in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. Social media giants to silence the voices of the people. And a free people must never, ever be enlisted in the cause of silencing, coercing, canceling, or blacklisting their own neighbors. When our nations are greater, the future will be brighter, our people will be happier, and our partnerships will be stronger.
And Hans Nichols joins us now to talk through this UN address. Hans, President Trump saying the future belongs to patriots over globalists. That nationalist rhetoric really isn't a big surprise. It's largely been the foundation of his entire foreign policy agenda. Were there some surprises tucked in there, though?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, I think we just heard a clear articulation of what the president believes in, what he thinks got him elected. In a way, this felt like Steve Bannon wrote this speech. It reminded me the most of the president's initial inaugural address, that American Carnage speech, which was pretty dark. It didn't have an optimistic, sunny view of the future. What the president is trying to impress upon his colleagues up there at the United Nations is this is his view, is that countries need to protect their own, that the international order, the international community has limits on what it can do, and the safest way, according to the president, to sustain peace is to have countries promote strong defenses by themselves. You saw a preview a little bit of this when he shifted his rationale for why he was withholding the funds to Ukraine, saying that he didn't think Europe was pulling its weight, that Europe wasn't doing it. But that's an argument, frankly, that we have heard from the president. You'll recall heading into the first NATO summit in Brussels, the president didn't articulate his support for Article 5, the Mutual Defense Pact that really undergirds all of NATO. So complaining about Europeans in the international community has been a long-standing argument from the president. The challenge and really the problem for him is that just 24 hours he made a different argument, and that is that he pressed the Ukrainians and that he withheld this money because he was worried about corruption. Today it's that he was worried that the Europeans weren't pulling their weight. Those are two different arguments. They can both be true in some sense, but in a way the president needs to decide which one was the proximate cause, which one actually caused him to withhold this funds. Guys?
Hans, the president also called out other nations for treating the U.S. unfairly on things like trade. Obviously, we know the trade war with China is looming. How are the world leaders responding to that? You know, it seems like world leaders have a wait-and-see approach with Trump. And I hesitate there because I think a lot of leaders are also hesitating. I have a great deal of sympathies for all the ambassadors around this town. They're trying to explain what Trump is doing and trying to give their governments the best possible advice about what it means for the future of U.S. relations with whatever country it is. And the challenge is that there's so much erraticism from the president. He's here one place on one day, he's there another. It's very difficult to figure out what's real
what's his Twitter feed, and what's United States policy. In a way, because he didn't really break new ground, today was almost anticipated. It was almost what you would expect. There was a little bit on potential for peace talks with North Korea. A lot of the things that we've heard from the president in the past. The issue is that we get the unvarnished Trump so frequently, whether or not he's departing from the South Lawn, whether or not he's just talking to reporters, that when he's reading from a prompter that studiously and that diligently, as he appeared to be today, it's almost as though that has less weight in terms of his policy pronouncements to what he's either letting his thumb say on Twitter or what he's saying when he leaves here on the South Lawn. Allison?
Hans, we know he also used the speech today to double down on the U.S. decision to pull out of several international treaties like the UN arms trade deal, the Iran nuclear deal. He talked a lot about Iran today. What's the latest on the tensions there and how that's playing out during the UNGA?
There's a potential, and I'm not going to put a probability on it. I'm just going to say a potential for a meeting because the president has always said he's willing to meet. At the same time, all the posture from the U.S. is really putting pressure on Iran and talking about how dastardly the regime is. I think the biggest news today as it relates to Iran is the joint statement from the United Kingdom, Germany, and France that it was indeed Iran who had some sort of culpability, some sort of responsibility for that attack on September 14th on the Saudi oil facilities. That is a victory for Mike Pence and for Mike Pompeo as they tried to get the Europeans on board, defining blame and pinning the blame on Iran. Now the question is, it perennially is at the United Nations, is what do you do about it? Because you can have a consensus, you can have Western countries, you can have NATO countries, but until you get the members of the Security Council to do something, it doesn't really matter if the European, at least Western European allies, are all on the same page. Allison?
Hans, we know there's a big meeting tomorrow with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Any other important meetings that Trump has or things that we should just be watching out for at the UN in the next day or so?
Just watch his Twitter feed. Watch to see if they release that transcript before the meeting, because the transcript is going to really define the news cycle as far as I can see. We're going to have Pelosi here in a little bit. What she says is going to matter, but really what's in that transcript, and there could be different interpretations, right? Like the entire Trump presidency, it could be a Rorschach test, but I think what's in that transcript, if it is clean and relatively unredacted, I think that's going to be the defining moment for the rest of the UN. Allison?
Hans, one thing that did surprise us, and my last question for you, he took a minute to address women's and LGBTQ rights today. A lot of people might have been surprised to hear that from the president.
So there has been a push in the administration, and he's been pressed by members of his administration, like Rick Grinnell, who's an openly gay ambassador to Germany, to really make this the standard United States policy that they will stand up for gay rights in the face of repressive regimes around the world. Now, the president doesn't always include that in his speeches, but that is part of official policy. So, yes, it was notable. This is the first time he's really went out of his way to say it in this venue, in this atmosphere, but it has been long-standing U.S. policy. It hasn't always been adhered to, and there have been slight deviations. You'll recall that during Pride, it was one of the Pride days in Pride Month, that some of the embassies wanted to run the Pride flag up the flagpole, and there was some guidance given that couldn't be co-equal with the U.S. flag, and there was some back and forth on what that meant. But it is the policy of the administration. We know it's important to his daughter, to his son-in-law. It just isn't always consistently applied, but it was notable that he mentioned it today in his speech. Allison?
Hans, I know I said last question, but I'm keeping you here for another second if you don't mind while we got you. Anything else? We've been focusing so much on what's been going on with Ukraine and Iran, and that really has sort of taken the bulk of our attention. Anything else that the president might have brought up at the UN this week that kind of maybe got glossed over because we're so busy focusing on these big issues?
China, and that is that we are now in late September, and we're no closer to a deal than we were in April, and that could start having real economic effects on consumer spending down the line. But he's talked about China, but he hasn't really made new news. But the fact that there's stasis there at a certain point becomes a stalemate, and that becomes a story. Yeah,
an interesting thing I saw today, there was some back and forth between him and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin over that. We know that last week the delegation from China was here. They were supposed to go visit the farms. They canceled. We thought that was China. Mnuchin said no, it was us. The president seemed confused about that.
Yeah.
Any indication or anything you can read from that maybe things with China are just not moving in any direction? It almost seemed like no one really knew what was going on there.
Yes and no. That was confusing, and I can't really impose any order on that confusion. I was confused about it as well. I think what you've been hearing from officials is the real visit is next month, and that this was a lower level visit, and the real visit is going to be in October when Li Hu comes over, and that is when you have a potential to unstick some of these roadblocks. But they still seem a long ways away. When you look at their rhetoric, they clearly aren't driving towards or dovetailing towards a solution.
All right, Hans Nichols at the White House, sticking with us for quite a few questions. I appreciate your patience, sir. Thank you.
You bet.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.